we're doing a wet and wet technique, kind of similar like what you might see with Bob Ross. So I've got my palette set up over here. It's going to be kind of a wintry palette. I'll share this with patrons. And layers palette here, tilt and navigator up here. I have, this is an 8x10 painting that I'll use the nanopixel export to size up for prints. And I'm going to put the pigment on, the true pigment, so that way I can get more of a realistic painting and look. So the first thing I want to do is get my canvas wet so we can do the wet and wet technique. And I'm going to go with kind of this off blue here. Oh, I forgot to wet the layer. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay, so now that the layer is wet, we can confirm it by switching over to the show the wet icon and back. So what I painted here is going to then blend with this and give us that kind of wet and wet technique. So the other thing I want to do is I'm going to create a new layer here. Now when I do that, that's going to keep this layer wet, but it's not going to be as wet as it was. But anyway, so I'm going to go here because I want to kind of draw it out so you guys can see a little bit of what the plan is. So let me grab just a darker color. Alright, so my thoughts are have maybe a tree coming down through here. Something like that. Actually, I'll tell you what, I'm going to make this easier. Control Z. And let's do this. Even though I will break this up, let's kind of draw in. So I think I'm actually, as I was looking at it, I think I'm going to put a big tree here to kind of frame everything. All right. And obviously I'm not going to keep these as telephone poles, but it's just to give me an idea. And you can freehand these in. Whoops. You can freehand these in if you want with the masking selection tool over here. So if you wanted to just draw these in, you could. And see how you could start quickly adding in shapes and so forth. And so I think, something like that. And then I want to have maybe, kind of a crag of old trees and stuff here. Maybe something like that. And then I think maybe kind of like the idea of maybe putting a log coming across here. Kind of disappears. Something like that, maybe. And then back through here, I'll just kind of add in some other trees. Like, for example, let me just come down here and do this. Maybe go to now, obviously, I'm going to change this around quite a bit. This is just for the underpainting, you know, getting the, not the, even the underpainting, just kind of the layout. And that gives us some interesting kind of a look. And we'll put maybe kind of a maybe a light source. Over here, you know, something like that. So it's kind of hitting down through here. But just something like that, you know. So now we've got kind of, you can see where we're going. We have several layers of atmospheric perspective here. So we've got the sky background, the lighting background. We'll probably put in some clouds and mist. First level of trees, next level of trees, then the undergrowth and stuff. Some other trees in the background. Come into this one. log line across to this one, and then to this one and this one here. So that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 layers that we have just for atmospheric perspective here. So I think that would work for, you know, what we're trying to do. So now we can play around with this and start kind of dialing it in and figuring out exactly what we want to do, because we have an idea and a map for what we're going to do. So now what I want to do is grab these and let's merge them together. So that gives us a nice idea of where we're going. Okay. And you can keep it here in a lowered state like this, or you can just toggle it off and on like this. Okay. So right now I'm going to work on the sky. So I know that I want, and again, this layer is wet, and so I know I want to put in some you know, just clouds, kind of sky look and feel. And I want to break it up a little bit and kind of give the illusion of trees and stuff, leaves, and breaking through. So one of the ways we can do that, we could grab the watercolor brush and we can grab some of these splats like so. I'm going to turn diffusion, I'm going to pause diffusion by pressing D, and I'm going to just kind of throw some of this in here like so. And I have this color palette, and then I have another one that's kind of off screen this is based from. And I'm just clicking with my mouse, so there's no pressure sensitivity from my pen. Okay, let's unpause. And pause. Okay, so that's not too bad. Actually, I'm going to Control Z it. I'm going to unpause it now. Trying to see something with these settings. So visual settings I have over here, and I have like the impasto, depth, drip size, drip length, diffusion speed, all that, texture influence. So I was just looking to see if I had this, and it took a second for me to look, but I was looking to see if I had this diffusion speed up high, because that was diffusing kind of weird and quickly. So but it looks fine. Alright, so we're going to leave the diffusion paused. And actually, I think I'm going to take a little bit of this gray and break that up a little bit. Something like unpause, pause. All right. Now I'm going to fast dry, unpause, and I'm going to wet the layer again. So that stops the diffusion and leaves me with this kind of mottled background. Okay, so now what I can do is I can come over to the oil paints, or even the express oil paints, and if I wanted to grab one of these like liners or soft round or something like that, I can put it on blend number 4 here and just kind of lightly soften this around. Like so. So all I did was add some texture with that and kind of soften this out like so. Okay, and then I can build it up more if I want to. I can come back and mess around with it and build it up more. Alright, now I'm going to grab my airbrush and I'm going to come into this lighter color, and we know that the lighting we want to be coming primarily from here, so I'm just going to lighten that so it's not quite white, but it's lighter. Okay, so it gives kind of that interesting look and feel. So there's a method to the madness here. Okay, alright, so now I want to put some trees and stuff over this that are going to be that little bit darker, so like these trees for example, like these. Okay, so we're going to add some of those in. So again, I'm going to come back to my stencils, just because the stencils make it a little bit quicker. And I want these to be up a little bit. And let's see, we'll go just a little bit darker and change it just slightly. Using the flat oily because this is where I want to start adding in some look. Now I'm going to kind of avoid this grass area that I have in the stencil. Just kind of softly add that in. If there's any that I don't like. Just kind of fade that out. And so I have the oiliness way up, and I have the impasto depth way up because I want to build up some textures. Okay. Now one thing, let me show you this. One thing that you might want to do, that this will probably help. Let me undo this. Okay. So go ahead and create a layer on top of this and work in layers so that you've got your sky layer back here, so that way if you want to adjust it and play around with it, you can. It's easier. That's one of the advantages of, you know, working in digital, is that we can have everything on layers. So if there's something we don't like, we can twist it, turn it, and contort it and move it around. So that way if you put like this on there and you're like, that's kind of too dark for right there, which it is, you could always change the opacity down like so. Like so, for example, if I wanted to really lower this down to maybe 25%, or somewhere around there, maybe 40-ish. Okay, so that's a little softer. Grab another stencil, because I want to move these around and go with some different things. A little too soft. But again, like I was just doing right there, it's like, oh look, I can play around with this. Now with stencils, I like to go and turn off the lock size ratio so that I can stretch these. Because a lot of times trees are going to be similar trees, in other words, similar species in a forest, especially near each other. So I like to go with the same stencil, but then twist it and turn it size-wise so that it's not the exact same. So see those trees, even though same stencil, looks like different but similar trees, if that makes sense. I can even play around with the size a little bit. I can flip it. Like so. Switch to another one. Maybe so something like that. Then I can come between them, because I really like this one stencil that I have for, there's actually a couple of stencils that I really like using, but this is one of them that I like for distant stuff. And yes, I know that's too dark right now. this, I can reduce down. Get it kind of where I want it. Go to this, go a little bit darker. Control click this, come back down to this one, delete it, so I don't have the overlap. Okay, and see how that's giving us that kind of feel of that goes on and on. Alright. Then I can come into here, like say for this one, for example, if I wanted to, I could play around with the lighting here and make this, push this back even further, or just lighten it a little bit more. But by having these lightened, it picks up the layer, this layer below, the layer 1, and the lighting and some of those stuff, so it's naturally giving me some of that lighting coming across it. Okay, so it's a great way to build some atmospheric perspective just kind of quickly. Alright, so we've got that built on top of that, built on top of that. Alright, and we've got some of the wet and wet technique, but there's more stuff. It'd actually be more in the trees that we'll get some of that. And so if we look at our map here, we see that we've got the trees kind of building in. We might go with one more layer here, and then we'll start bringing in these layers. So let's maybe do that next layer. Okay, so kind of coming down through here. And one thing we could even do is you can kind of, like, for example, if you like how this looks, like I kind of like how that looks right there. So I can bring in the stencils and kind of play around with them. So I could go with invert, click on it again, change the size a little bit, invert, move it around, maybe something like that. Invert, and maybe turn off the size ratio and give it a little bit of change. And then maybe bring in a different stencil. Something like that. Create a new layer. So now I have an idea of where I'm going to lay everything out and how it's going to be done. So all I got to do is I'll click on and this is one thing I wish that Rebelle would fix. I don't like that this dialog box is all the way over here. I wish that this could, you could click on it, like right click on it and get that dialog box or something like that, so you don't have to zoom out to try and get this dialog box. It's just one of the things. It's a small thing, but it still bugs me. Alright, so for this I'm going to go a little bit, that may be a little bit dark, but again we can adjust the layer. So I'm just going to paint this in. Like so. Backspace, I'm going to get rid of it. Invert. Paint this in. Now it's going to be masked because that one's in front of it, but that's not a big deal. Get rid of it. invert, and this is why it wasn't a big deal, because I'm just going to paint over it. Backspace, invert, backspace, invert. And backspace. And let's bring that down as well. Okay, maybe something like that. Control click, go to the one below it, delete. Control D. Let's look at our map. So I think that's going to give us a good kind of similar range. Now this down through here, we can go back to here, bring that up to full, select it, go back down to where it was, and then just kind of fill that in. Again, not worrying about the overlap here because we can simply control click on that, delete, and now we've got that filled in. And it gives us some more thick layers and that kind of stuff. So here's one of the things I like to do is that you can duplicate this and it'll give you a little bit thicker layer and stuff. So but we can come back and play with that later. Okay. Alright, so now we've got, if you hit the period, it comes back to full screen where you can see everything. We've got a decent amount of trees, and you can see how that texture, that little subtle texture I have back there, kind of makes it look like more trees way off in the distance. So that was the reason for doing that. So we've got way trees, 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 all kind of coming closer. Okay. So that gives you a really good idea for atmospheric perspective on how to do that. And you know, as you can see, it wasn't too difficult to get that look. Now, any of these stencils, like if you do any of these and you're like, well, it's a little too crisp or it's a little too repetitive, like this shape right here repeats over here and up in here, so I don't really like that. Well, that's the point of the stencils, is to lay it out how you do like it, and then just kind of come in and you can go over it and add some shadow and so forth. Okay, so feel free to play around with it. Now, if the important thing is make sure you're on the right layer. So, but you can come around and play around with it and stuff like that. You can also just switch to 4 and kind of drag it if you want to soften some of these edges a little bit. You kind of drag it out into a different position. So that's a great way to kind of take that cut stencil look off of it. Just don't do it too much because you'll blur the edges too much. But if you want to play around with breaking up the shape a little bit here and there, it's a great way to do it. Like so. And again, if there's something you don't like about it, as far as like an overlap, you just select the layer above it and then delete. Alright, so I'm going to save that real quick. I'm going to save the video. I'll be right back.